The council chamber had never seen anything like the scene that unfolded when security forces dragged Sarah Chen and Taran through its doors. Delegates, who had been in the middle of finalizing attack vectors and supply chain logistics, stopped mid-sentence and stared at the bloodied human woman being held at gunpoint. Alongside one of their own military officers, Sarah had abandoned any pretense of her Sithari disguise. The damaged biosuit hanging in strips from her body, like the shed skin of some strange creature caught between metamorphosis. Ambassador Krath moved to the center of the chamber with all four arms raised in a gesture of alarm and authority. Combined, fellow council members, we have been infiltrated by a human spy who's been living among us for years, gathering our secrets and manipulating our decisions. The ambassador declared, I propose we execute this infiltrator immediately and accelerate our attack timeline to compensate for whatever intelligence she has transmitted to her government. The Vrel delegates' tentacles writhed in agitation. I want to hear what the human has to say before we discuss execution. They said, we are supposed to be a civilized council, not a mob dispensing summary justice. The human is a spy and a saboteur. Krath insisted. There is nothing she could say that would justify allowing her to continue breathing our air. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, despite the weapons trained on her, speaking in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber. My name is Commander Sarah Chun, and I was sent here to gather intelligence on your intentions toward humanity. She said, I have spent 2 years living among you as Dr. Kelleth Vron, and in that time I have learned things about my own species that shame me. I have seen the evidence of what our nanomachines did to Vraxis 4. I have read reports of our reckless expansion and our refusal to accept responsibility for the harm we cause. I understand why you fear us. The council members murmured among themselves, some in anger and some in confusion at this unexpected confession. But I have also discovered something else. Sarah continued, looking directly at Ambassador Krath. I have discovered that some members of this council are not planning the limited strike and quarantine that was authorized. They are planning genocide and using your fear and anger as tools to manipulate you into supporting the complete extermination of humanity. Krath's scales turned crimson with rage. The human lies to save her species from justified punishment. Taran stepped forward, wounded but standing tall. I am Strategic Officer Tarin of the Raxian Defense Fleet. They announced, I lost my entire family to the Vraxis 4 incident, and no one in this chamber has more right to call for human blood than I do. But I stand here today to tell you that Ambassador Krath has been deceiving this council about the true nature of the planned operation. They held up the data crystal for all to see. This contains communications between Ambassador Krath and extremist groups on 7 different worlds. Messages that discuss plans for escalating the initial strike into a war of extermination. They intend to use our authorized limited action as a cover for genocide, then blame the escalation on human retaliation to justify continued violence. The chamber erupted in chaos as delegates shouted questions and accusations. The Zinthari representatives' crystalline body chimed with agitation as they demanded to examine the evidence. Pointed at Turian with all 4 arms trembling. You are traitor to your species, corrupted by this human infiltrator. The ambassador spat. You dishonor the memory of everyone who died on Vraxis 4. Taran's scales flickered with colors that showed deep pain but also unshakable resolve. My family died because of human negligence and arrogance, they said quietly. But I will not dishonor their memory by becoming a genocidal monster who uses their deaths as an excuse to kill billions of innocents. That is not justice, Ambassador. That is revenge dressed in the language of necessity. The Vrel delegate extended a tentacle toward the data crystal. Let us examine this evidence before we make any decisions about executions or timeline changes. The Zinthari representative agreed. And soon half the council was demanding access to the files, while the other half argued about whether they should even consider evidence brought by a spy in the chaos. Sarah caught the eye of the Sithari delegate, the real representative of the species she had been impersonating for 2 years. Sithari was staring at her with an expression of betrayal and confusion. "I am sorry for deceiving you and your people," Sarah said directly to them. "Dr. Vraughn's research and publications were real. The friendships I made were based on genuine respect, even if my identity was false. I wish I could have met you as myself, instead of as an imposter." The Sithari delegate looked away, clearly struggling with complex emotions. The council spent the next hour reviewing Taran's evidence while Sarah stood under guard in the center of the chamber. The files were damning. Communications showing that Krath had been coordinating with militant groups who advocated for the complete extermination of humanity. Strategic documents that outlined plans for escalating the conflict beyond what the council had authorized, and evidence that Krath had suppressed information from moderate delegates about potential diplomatic alternatives. The Morphen delegate, who had missed the original vote and had been arguing against the strike plan, was particularly vocal in their outrage. "We voted for a limited action to enforce quarantine and demand accountability," they said in a voice like grinding stone. "We did not vote for genocide. And we certainly did not vote to be manipulated into supporting genocide through deception and suppressed information." The Threen representative turned their multiple eyes toward Ambassador Krath. "You have dishonored this council and violated the trust we placed in your leadership of the military planning," they said. "I call for your immediate removal from your position and a complete review of the operation plan." Krath realized they were losing control of the situation and made a desperate play. "Even if I acted beyond my authority, the fundamental truth remains unchanged. Humanity is a threat to every peaceful species in the galaxy." The ambassador argued. "They have proven through their actions that they cannot be trusted to coexist with us. They cannot be controlled through diplomacy, and they will continue expanding and causing harm until they either dominate the galaxy or are stopped by force. This human spy's presence among us proves how dangerous they are. They can infiltrate our most secure facilities and manipulate even our military officers into betraying their own people." Sarah knew this was the critical moment, the point where the council would either fall back into fear and anger or find the courage to consider an alternative path. She stepped forward again, ignoring the weapons that tracked her movement. "Everything Ambassador Krath said about humanity's past actions is true," she said. "We have been reckless. We have caused harm through negligence and arrogance, and we have refused to accept accountability for our mistakes. But I'm standing here today as proof that not all humans are blind to our failures. I came here as a spy. Yes, but I stayed because I believed there had to be a better way than mutual extermination. I have seen the evidence of what my species did to Raxus 4 and dozens of other incidents where we caused harm and refused responsibility. And I am asking you to give me the chance to take that evidence back to Earth, to force my government to face the truth of what we have done and what we will become if we continue down this path." The Vrel delegate's tentacles went very still. "You want us to trust you to return to your homeworld and somehow convince your government to submit to our authority when they would not even acknowledge fault for Vraxis 4. I want you to let me try," Sarah said, "because the alternative is a war that will kill billions on both sides and prove that neither of our civilizations deserves to call itself advanced or enlightened. Give me a chance to broker a real first contact between Earth and this council, one based on full disclosure of our crimes and mandatory oversight to prevent future incidents. If my government refuses, then you can proceed with your quarantine plan and I will not stand in your way. But if we never try to find a peaceful solution, then we are all just proving that intelligence and technology mean nothing without wisdom. The chamber fell silent as the delegates considered this proposal. Finally, the Sci-Fi representative spoke, their voice carrying the musical quality that Sarah had imitated for 2 years. Dr. Vrong published 3 papers on cross-species disease transmission that have saved countless lives across 4 different worlds. They said slowly, those papers were researched and written by this human while she was pretending to be one of my people. She could have published meaningless work that would have maintained her cover without contributing anything of value. But instead, she chose to do real science that helped real people. That suggests to me that she is capable of caring about species other than her own, which is more than we can say for some members of this council. The Sci-Fi delegate looked at Sarah with an expression that might have been forgiveness or might have been challenge. I vote to give the human a chance to prove her words with actions. They said. The Zinthri representative chimed in agreement. I also vote for this proposal, on the condition that the human carries our full evidence of her species, crimes, and presents it to her government without alteration or omission. Sarah and Tarn sat in her quarters for 3 hours while she laid out everything she had discovered about the radical faction's true agenda. She showed Tarn the communications she had intercepted between the Raxian ambassador and extremist cells on multiple worlds. Messages that spoke of humanity's extinction as a necessary cleansing rather than a defensive action. Tarn studied the evidence with the careful attention of a trained military analyst, their scales shifting through colors that indicated shock and growing anger. Ambassador Krath has been lying to the council. Taren said finally. The plan they presented was supposed to be a limited strike followed by enforced quarantine. But these messages suggest they intend to use the initial attack as justification for a follow-up campaign of complete extermination. They plan to blame the escalation on human retaliation and use that to convince the other species to support total warfare. Sarah nodded grimly. And once the shooting starts, it will be almost impossible to stop the momentum toward genocide. Both sides will have casualties. Both sides will want revenge. And the moderates who argued for diplomatic solutions will be drowned out by calls for blood. Tarn looked at her with an expression that might have been respect or might have been calculation. You could have taken this evidence and returned to your people. They said. You could have warned them about the strike and let them prepare their defenses. Then, used our attack as justification for human counterstrikes against our worlds. Instead, you stayed here and revealed yourself to me, which was incredibly foolish from a strategic standpoint. Probably, Sarah admitted. But I have seen what happens when species choose warfare over wisdom. I have seen the footage of what our nanomachines did to Vraxis 4. And I have read reports of a dozen other incidents where human arrogance and recklessness caused harm we never took responsibility for. If I just run back to Earth with intelligence about your attack plans, we will fight and maybe we will win because humans are very good at warfare when our survival is threatened. But even if we win, we will prove everything your people fear about us is correct. Taren was quiet for a long moment, processing this. So, what do you propose instead? We expose the radical faction's true agenda to the full council. Sarah said, we prove that Ambassador Krath and their allies are manipulating everyone toward genocide. And we force a real debate about whether extermination is the only option or if there are alternatives. That will never work. Tarn said, flatly, the moment you appear before the council as a human, they will execute you as a spy and probably execute me as a traitor for not reporting you immediately. Not if we have undeniable proof that some council members have been deceiving the others. Sarah countered. The species who voted for limited strikes will be furious when they learn they are being manipulated into supporting genocide. We can create a fracture in the coalition before the fleet ever launches. Tarn considered this. Their strategic mind clearly working through the possibilities and risks. We would need more than just intercepted communications, they said. We would need access to the ambassador's secure files. evidence of coordination with extremist groups, proof of the planned escalation beyond what was authorized, the kind of evidence that is stored in the Communications Center's secured archives. Sarah said Taryn's scales went very still, which Sarah had learned meant the young Raxian was experiencing intense emotion they were trying to control. Breaking into the Communications Center would require bypassing multiple security protocols and likely fighting our way past armed guards. Toran said, "It would be a one-way trip for both of us. Do you have a better idea?" Sarah asked. They sat in silence for several minutes while Taran wrestled with a decision that would define the rest of their life. However long that might be. Finally, the young strategist stood up with movements that suggested someone preparing for battle. "I will help you," Toran said, "not because I trust humans or believe your species deserves mercy, but because I will not allow my people to become genocidal monsters in the name of preventing genocide. My family died on Vraxis 4, and their memory deserves better than to be used as justification for killing billions who had nothing to do with that tragedy." Sarah felt relief and gratitude wash over her, but there was no time for sentiment. They had less than one cycle before the Council's final planning session, and after that, the fleet would begin assembling for the attack if they were going to act. It had to be. Now Taran used their military clearance to access schematics of the Communications Center while Sarah contacted Marcus one final time. "I am about to do something that will either prevent a war or start one immediately," she told her handler. "If you don't hear from me in 12 hours, assume I am dead and warn Earth that the attack is coming." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew that tone in Sarah's voice. "Good luck, Commander," he said simply, and terminated the connection. Sarah destroyed the communicator to prevent it from being traced back to Earth, then gathered what few weapons she had managed to smuggle onto the station over the past 2 years. A small plasma cutter that could double as a weapon, an electromagnetic pulse device disguised as a medical scanner, and a monofilament blade hidden inside what appeared to be a writing stylus. Darren had access to actual military weapons through their position, but bringing those to the Communications Center would trigger immediate alarms. They would have to rely on speed, surprise, and the hope that most of the security personnel would hesitate before firing on a decorated military officer. The Communications Center was located in the most heavily secured section of the Obsidian Conclave, accessible only through a series of checkpoints that required biometric verification and security codes that changed every hour. Nest clearance got them through the first 2 checkpoints without incident. But at the 3rd checkpoint, the security officer on duty looked at Sarah with suspicious eyes. "Dr. Vron does not have authorization to access this section," the officer said, "a member of the Threen species whose multiple eyes could detect things that other species might miss. Dr. Vron is assisting me with analysis of human communication patterns for the tactical planning," Taran said smoothly. "I submitted the authorization request this morning." The security officer checked their terminal and frowned with movements that involved too many facial muscles. "I show no record of such authorization." Taran moved with the speed that came from years of combat training. They grabbed the security officer's weapon arm and twisted while simultaneously hitting the alarm silence button on the console with their other hand. Sarah activated her empty device and the checkpoints systems went dark for 3 crucial seconds. That was enough time for Taran to incapacitate the guard with a blow to their sensory cluster, and for Sarah to seal the checkpoint door behind them. "We have maybe 2 minutes before someone notices the checkpoint went offline," Taran said, already running toward the Communications Center's main archive chamber. They encountered 2 more guards who were confused by the power fluctuations and did not react quickly enough to stop. Taran's assault. Sarah followed behind, her own combat training from human special forces coming back despite 2 years of playing the role of a peaceful scientist. They reached the archive chamber and Taran used their command codes to access the secured files while Sarah kept watch. On the corridor behind them, alarms began blaring through the station as security finally realized something was wrong. "How long do you need?" Sarah shouted over the noise. 3 minutes to download everything and compile it into a format the Council cannot dismiss as fabricated. Taran replied, their hands moving frantically across the interface. Sarah heard boots running in the corridor and knew they would not have 3 minutes. She stepped out into the hallway and activated her plasma cutter, using it to seal one end of the corridor with molten metal. Raxian security forces appeared at the other end and opened fire with energy weapons that scorched the walls around her. Sarah dove back into the archive chamber as Taran worked frantically at the console. 2 minutes. The young strategist said energy blasts began cutting through the sealed door, and Sarah knew their time was running out. She grabbed a fallen security officer's shield generator and set it up to cover the entrance, buying them precious seconds. They are going to burn through that in 30 seconds. Sarah said, I need you to trust me one more time. Taran said, without looking up from their work, when I finish this download, I am going to trigger a priority alert that will summon the entire council to the main chamber. We are going to walk out of here and straight into that chamber. And you are going to tell them everything while I present this evidence. They will kill us before we get 10 words out. Sarah protested, probably. Taran agreed, but it is the only way to ensure this information reaches the moderate delegates before the extremists can suppress it. The shield generator failed, and security forces began pouring into the archive chamber. Taran grabbed the data crystal containing all the evidence and triggered the council alert. Sarah dropped her weapons and raised her hands as 24 guards surrounded them with weapons drawn. Taran did the same, their scale showing colors of grim determination. We invoked the right of urgent testimony before the full council, Taran announced in a voice that carried authority despite their situation. Sarah returned to the council chambers the next morning, wearing Dr. Vraughn's identity-like armor, her bioluminescent patterns carefully controlled to show appropriate levels of professional interest and commitment to the cause. The planning session was led by a Raxian military strategist named Taran, who was younger than most of the delegates but had been given authority over the tactical aspects of the operation due to their brilliant record in defensive warfare simulations. Taran stood at the holographic display and walked the council through proposed strike vectors and target priorities with a precision that would have impressed any human military officer. We will divide our forces into 3 waves, Taran explained, their scales showing patterns that indicated calm focus. The first wave hits their orbital defense platforms and military installations around Earth and the major colonies. The second wave targets industrial centers and shipyards to prevent rapid reconstruction of their military capacity. The third wave maintains a blockade position to ensure compliance with our terms. Dr. Vaughn listened carefully and occasionally asked questions that a scientist concerned with minimizing casualties might ask. But inside, Sarah was cataloging every detail for her report back to command as the session progressed. She noticed something that made her pay closer attention. Taran kept adjusting the targeting parameters to reduce civilian exposure to the attacks. When the Raxian ambassador suggested targeting population centers as a deterrent against future human aggression, Taran had politely but firmly pushed back with arguments about the military inefficiency of such tactics. Sarah found herself watching Taran more closely after that. During a break in the session, she approached the young strategist and initiated a conversation about their research background, using Dr. Vraughn's academic credentials as an entry point. I read your dissertation on asymmetric warfare doctrine, Sarah said, which was true because she had spent half the night studying everything she could find about Taran. Your analysis of the Krulvrel conflict was fascinating. Taran's scales shifted to colors then. Suggested pleased surprise. I am honored that someone of your academic standing would bother reading the work of a military officer, they replied. Military strategy and xenobiology are not so different, Sarah said, falling into the role of Dr. Vraughan easily after 2 years of practice. Both require understanding how different species think and react under pressure. They talked for 20 minutes about the intersection of biology and warfare, and Sarah found herself genuinely engaged with Taran's ideas. Despite the circumstances, the young Araxian had a thoughtful approach to conflict that emphasized understanding one's opponent, rather than simply overwhelming them with force as they spoke. Sarah noticed that Taran's scales occasionally flickered with colors that indicated deep sadness beneath their professional demeanor. You lost family on Vraxis 4, Sarah said gently. Remembering what the ambassador had mentioned, it was not really a question. Taran was silent for a long moment before responding. My parents, my 2 younger siblings, my bonded partner, and our newly hatched offspring. I was off-world serving in the defense fleet when it happened. By the time I got the message and returned home, there was nothing left but empty cities and the smell of dissolution in the air. Sarah felt her real heart break inside her chest because she had seen the footage and knew exactly what Taran's family had suffered. I am so sorry, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Your human contact taught you their expression of sympathy? Taran asked with what might have been bitter amusement. I have studied many species' cultural practices. Sarah deflected. Loss is universal, even if the words we use to acknowledge it differ. Taran looked at her with eyes that seemed to see past the biosuit to something beneath. You are different from most Sithari I have met, they said. Carefully, most of your species prefer to avoid discussions of death and loss. They find such topics disturbing to their cultural emphasis on harmony and peaceful existence. Sarah's mind raced to find an appropriate response that would not compromise her cover. Perhaps losing my own family to deep-sea predators when I was young changed my perspective, she said, drawing on the backstory that human intelligence had created for Dr. Vraughan. Taran accepted this, and their conversation drifted to other topics. But Sarah could not shake the feeling that the young strategist suspected something was not quite right about the Sethari scientists they were talking to over the next 2 days. Sarah maintained her cover while continuing to gather intelligence and carefully sabotage small details of the operation plan. She introduced minor errors into targeting calculations that would reduce the effectiveness of the strikes against civilian areas. She suggested alternative approach vectors that would give human defense forces slightly more warning time. She did these things knowing that she was potentially betraying her own species, but also knowing that after seeing the evidence of human recklessness, she could not in good conscience help enable strikes that would kill billions of people who had no say in their governments. Policies Marcus sent increasingly urgent messages demanding her extraction and full intelligence reports. Sarah sent back minimal updates and kept delaying her departure because she had become convinced that there had to be a third option beyond total war or total surrender. She spent her nights accessing more files and discovered something that changed everything. Not all the council members had voted for the strike plan enthusiastically. 3 species, the Vrel, the Zinthari, and a species called the Morphin, who had not attended the first meeting, had argued for diplomatic quarantine instead of military action. They had been outvoted, but their dissent was documented in the meeting records. Sarah also discovered evidence that the most extreme positions were coming from a small faction within the Raxian delegation, members of a political movement that blamed humanity for more than just the Vraxis 4 incident. This faction had been using the council as cover to push for actions that went far beyond what had been officially authorized. They wanted complete extermination of the human species, and they were manipulating intelligence reports and strategic assessments to make that outcome seem like the only rational choice. Sarah was compiling this evidence when her door chime sounded. Unexpectedly, she quickly sealed away her work and resumed her biosuit identity before opening the door to find Taran standing in the corridor. "Dr. Vron, may I speak with you privately?" The young strategist asked. Sarah's instincts screamed danger, but she maintained her calm demeanor and invited Taran. Inside, they stood in her quarters, looking at each other for a long moment before Taran spoke. "Your biosuit malfunctioned briefly during our conversation 2 days ago," they said quietly. "I saw human skin beneath the membrane." Sarah felt ice flood through her veins, but she kept her voice steady. "That is a serious accusation to make without evidence. I have been watching you since then," Taran continued. "The way you move is not quite right for a Sithari. The way you ask questions suggests a military intelligence background rather than pure academic curiosity. And your access patterns in the network have been far more extensive than a scientist would need." Sarah calculated her options in the space of a heartbeat. She could try to maintain the deception, but Taran clearly had enough doubts to bring this to security if they chose. She could try to incapacitate Taran and run for the extraction point, but that would trigger a station-wide alert and likely doom any chance of preventing the war. Or she could take the most dangerous option. "Trust. If you believed I was a human infiltrator, why did you not report me immediately?" Sarah asked. Taran's scales rippled with colors that indicated complex emotional conflict. "Because I have been questioning the morality of our planned strike since before I met you," they admitted. "Lost everything to human recklessness, and part of me wants to see them punished for what they did. But another part of me remembers that before Vraxis 4, I believed that civilization meant rising above revenge and seeking justice instead. I have watched you sabotage targeting calculations to reduce civilian casualties. I have seen you advocate for restraint when others called for overwhelming force. And I have wondered what kind of human would vote for the destruction of their own species." Sarah made her decision. She reached up and began removing her biosuit, peeling away the layers of deception until she stood before Taran as Commander Sarah Chun. "Human intelligence operative. My name is Sarah," she said. "I was sent here to gather intelligence on your species' intentions toward humanity. But after seeing the evidence of what we did to your world, to your family, I am no longer sure which side deserves to be called the enemy." Taran stared at her with an expression that Sarah could not read, their hand moving toward the communication device on their belt. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or somehow transform into something neither of them had expected. "I need your help," Sarah said before Taran could make the call. "There is a faction manipulating this council toward genocide, and if we do not stop them, billions will die on both sides." Taran's hand hesitated over their communicator. "Why should I trust you?" they asked. "Your species killed my family. Because you have been questioning this path since before you knew who I was," Sarah replied. "Because you are a strategist who understands that revenge is not the same as justice." The door to Dr. Vron's quarters sealed behind them with a soft hiss, and the moment the privacy locks engaged, Sarah Chun allowed herself to slump against the wall. Her hands trembled as she reached for the seals on the water suit that had been her prison and her disguise for the past 2 years. The biosuit was a marvel of human engineering, something that should not have been possible according to every xenobiologist in both human and alien space. It was made from layers of synthetic tissue grown from Sithari DNA samples, combined with programmable matter that could mimic the movement and texture of alien flesh beneath. That was a network of tubes and pumps that circulated water to maintain the illusion. And beneath that was a compression layer that reshaped Sarah's human body into something that could pass for Sci-Fi physiology under all but the most invasive medical scans. She peeled away the outer layer carefully, revealing the secondary skin beneath, and then that came off too, exposing her real hands with their 5 fingers instead of the webbed appendages the aliens expected to see. Sarah stumbled to the mirror in her quarters and looked at her reflection, half-human face emerging from alien disguise like some nightmare creature caught between transformations. Her real brown eyes stared back at her from beneath the artificial membrane that made them appear larger and more fish-like to casual observers. She had spent 2 years never seeing her real face, never speaking in her native language except in coded transmissions, never eating food that actually tasted good instead of the algae-based nutrition paste that Sci-Fi consumed 2 years of living as Dr. Calithron, respected scientist and trusted member of the galactic academic community. 2 years of building a cover identity so deep that she had published 3 groundbreaking papers on cross-species disease transmission and had been invited to lecture at universities on 4 different worlds. All of it had been preparation for this moment, for the intelligence that human command knew was coming, but could not predict the exact nature of until someone was deep enough inside alien circles to hear the truth. Sarah stripped off the rest of her biosuit and stood in her quarters wearing only the compression garment that reshaped her body. She moved to the communications console hidden behind a false panel in what appeared to be a water filtration system for her suit. The quantum entanglement communicator was about the size of her fist, a device that allowed instantaneous communication across any distance without the signal being detectable by conventional means. She activated it with her thumbprint and waited for the encryption protocols to sync with the receiver on the other end. A face appeared on the tiny screen. Commander Marcus Webb, her handler, and the man who had recruited her for this mission 3 years ago. "Chun, report," he said without preamble, his face showing the stress of whatever hour it was back at Human Intelligence Command. "They are planning a strike," Sarah said, keeping her voice low even though her quarters were supposed to be secure. "All 12 species on the council. Full military commitment. 3 cycles from now." Marcus swore creatively and looked off-screen at something or someone Sarah could not see. 3 cycles. That gives us less than 6 days to prepare defenses. What are their targets? Sarah felt sick as she recited what she had learned. Earth, Mars, Europa Station, and all 47 colony worlds. They are planning simultaneous strikes designed to cripple our military and industrial capacity. The official story is that they will offer us terms: submit to oversight or face permanent quarantine. Marcus looked directly at the camera with an intensity that made Sarah feel the weight of billions of lives pressing down on her shoulders. Unofficial story? There is a faction that wants complete extermination, Sarah admitted. I don't have proof yet, but the Raxian ambassador's rhetoric went beyond defensive action. I think some of them want to wipe us out entirely and are using the official plan as cover. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. We need you out of there immediately. He finally said, I am authorizing emergency extraction. There's a stealth ship that can be in position within 12 hours. No, Sarah said firmly. I cannot leave yet. Chun, you have done your job. You got us the intelligence we needed. Now it's time to come home before they discover who you really are. Sarah shook her head, even though she knew Marcus was right from a tactical standpoint. I need to understand why they fear us so much, she said. Yes, we have been aggressive in our expansion. Yes, we have ignored their protocols. But they are talking about killing billions of civilians. There has to be more to it than just fear of competition. Marcus sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. You are not a philosopher or a diplomat right now. You are an intelligence operative deep behind enemy lines, and your mission is complete. Get out while you still can. But Sarah had already made up her mind. 48 hours, she said. Give me 48 hours to access their classified files and find out what we are really dealing with here. If I don't find anything that changes the picture, I will extract on schedule. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew Sarah well enough to recognize when she had committed to a course of action. 48 hours, he agreed reluctantly. But at the first sign of compromise, you bug out immediately. Understood? Understood. Sarah terminated the connection and sat in the darkness of her quarters for a long moment, gathering her thoughts and her courage for what came next. The Obsidian Conclave's computer systems were heavily encrypted and monitored, but Dr. Kelethron had legitimate access to research databases and collaborative networks that connected to the broader system. Sarah spent the next 6 hours carefully exploiting that access, using techniques that human intelligence had developed specifically for this kind of infiltration work. She moved through the network like a ghost, leaving no traces, accessing files that the council members had uploaded for their private review. Before the next meeting, what she found made her blood run cold. Raxian Ambassador had uploaded a full report on the incident at Raxus 4, complete with video footage and medical examiner. Reports that Sarah's government had never seen because they had been sealed by alien authorities. She watched as the human terraforming machines that were supposed to break down rock and soil to prepare a planet for human agriculture went catastrophically wrong and began consuming organic matter. Instead, she watched as Raxian civilians tried to flee, while their bodies were literally dissolved from the inside out by microscopic machines that treated living tissue the same way they treated mineral deposits. She watched as an entire world died in 72 hours. And she watched as human colony ships that had been in the system simply jumped away without rendering aid or allowing alien investigators to board and examine the faulty technology. The official human response had been carefully worded: apologies and offers of financial compensation, but no admission of negligence, no surrender of the technology for independent analysis, no acceptance of responsibility beyond expressing regret that an accident had occurred. Sarah felt tears running down her face as she watched footage of Raxian children dying in their parents' arms. She understood now that aliens were not paranoid or xenophobic. They were terrified of a species that could cause this much destruction by accident and then refused to take real accountability for it. There were more files, reports of human mining operations that had contaminated water supplies on worlds where other species lived, reports of human colony ships that had fired on alien vessels that tried to enforce quarantine zones around restricted planets, reports of human traders who had introduced invasive species to delicate ecosystems and then disappeared before the damage became apparent. Every report showed the same pattern: humans acting with incredible recklessness, causing harm through negligence or deliberate disregard for consequences, and then refusing to submit to any authority beyond their own. Sarah downloaded everything she could onto a secure data crystal and then carefully erased all traces of her access. She sat in her quarters feeling like the floor had dropped out from beneath her. For 2 years she had believed she was serving the righteous cause of protecting humanity from alien aggression. Now she was not sure which side deserved to be called the aggressors. She reactivated the communicator and sent a brief encrypted message to Marcus. Situation more complex than briefed. Need additional time to analyze. Will report when able. Then she sealed herself back into her biosuit, and prepared to attend the next day's planning session as Dr. Kelleth Vaughn. Trusted Sci-Fi scientist, she would play her role and gather more intelligence, but now she had a new mission that her superiors had not authorized and might not approve. She needed to find out if there was any way to stop this war before it started, because after seeing what she had seen, Sarah was no longer certain that humanity deserved to be saved. The Obsidian Conclave floated in the darkness between stars, a massive structure that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black glass and metal combined together in ways that defied the engineering principles of any single species who had built it. Inside the main chamber, 12 different alien species gathered around a circular table that glowed with soft blue light from beneath its surface. Dr. Kelleth Vaughn sat among them, their body encased in the flowing water suit that all Sci-Fi needed to survive outside their home oceans. The bioluminescent patterns on their visible skin flickered in shades of green and yellow, showing what the other delegates would read as careful attention and growing concern. The Raxian ambassadors stood at the center of the circle, their 4 arms gesturing at the holographic display that showed images of human ships jumping through space with reckless speed. "Look at them," the Raxian hissed through their translator, their scales rippling with barely controlled anger. "They tear through our established jump lanes without permission. They ignore every protocol we have spent 10,000 years developing, and they do it with the arrogance of children playing with fusion cores." The hologram shifted to show a human colony ship approaching a world that had been marked as restricted by the galactic community for the past 6 centuries. Dr. Vaughn watched the images carefully, their artificial gills pumping water through their suits, circulation system with a steady rhythm that suggested calm contemplation. The Zinthari representative, a being of crystalline structure that reflected light in dizzying patterns, chimed in with a voice like breaking glass. "Our monitoring stations report that humans have established 47 colonies in the past 3 years alone, and 23 of those are in zones we designated as protected or under observation. They don't ask permission," added the Vrel delegate, a creature that looked like a mass of tentacles emerging from a shell of organic armor. "They don't seek guidance from species who have been navigating the stars since before their planet had multicellular life. They simply take what they want and dare us to stop them." Dr. Vaughn raised one webbed hand in a gesture that meant they wished to speak. The chamber fell silent as the other delegates turned their attention to the Sci-Fi scientist who had built a reputation over the past 2 years as one of the most brilliant xenobiologists in known space. "I have studied human biology and their cultural patterns extensively," Dr. Vaughn said, their voice carrying the musical quality that came from vocal cords designed to work underwater. "They are a young species. Yes, but that youth comes with a dangerous combination of traits. They have the aggression of apex predators, the adaptability of survival specialists, and the creativity of a species that evolved to solve problems through innovation rather than instinct." The delegates murmured among themselves, and Dr. Vaughn continued with growing intensity in their voice. "But what makes them truly dangerous is their capacity for exponential growth in both population and technology. In the mere 200 years since they achieved spaceflight, they have gone from simple orbital satellites to faster-than-light travel. They have gone from a single planet to 47 colonies. If we extrapolate their current rate of expansion, they will outnumber the combined populations of our 12 species within 3 generations." The Raxian ambassador nodded vigorously, all 4 arms crossing over their chest in a gesture of agreement. "Which brings us to the reason we have gathered in secret today," they said, their voice dropping to a more serious tone. "We have intelligence that suggests humanity is not content with mere expansion." The hologram changed again, this time showing grainy footage of what appeared to be a massive weapon platform under construction in orbit around one of humanity's outer colonies. Our agents have confirmed that this is a planet-killer weapon, something they call a stellar compression cannon that can destabilize a star and cause it to go supernova. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations and angry chitters and hisses in a dozen different languages. Dr. Vron felt their real heart rate spike beneath the layers of synthetic flesh and biosuit technology that disguised them. But they kept their bioluminescent patterns steady and controlled. The Threen representative, a tall being with too many joints in their limbs and eyes that could see into the infrared spectrum, stood up from their seat. "This is beyond mere expansion or protocol violations," they said, with a voice that sounded like wind through canyon rocks. "This is preparation for war, for domination, for the extinction of any species that stands in their way. We all know what happened to the Raxian colony world of Raxus IV," the Threen continued, gesturing toward the Raxian ambassador. "The humans claim it was an accident, a malfunction in their terraforming nanomachines. But 17 million Raxians died in 3 days. The machines consumed everything organic on that world, breaking it down into raw materials for human use." The Raxian ambassador's scales turned a deep red color that indicated grief and rage mixed together. "My own sister and her entire family were among the dead," they said quietly. "The human government sent apologies and offered compensation, but they never admitted fault, never submitted to an independent investigation, never allowed us to examine their technology to prevent future accidents." Dr. Vron listened to this and felt a cold weight settling in their chest, because they knew what was coming next, knew what had to happen if they wanted to maintain their cover among these people who had every reason to fear the species that Dr. Kenneth Vron actually belonged to. "We cannot wait for humanity to finish their weapons," the Zintari delegate said with sounds like chimes in a lies storm. "We cannot allow them to grow stronger while we debate and discuss and hope they will learn wisdom. We must act now, while we still have the advantage of numbers and experience." The Vrel delegate's tentacles writhed in what might have been agreement or agitation, or both. "What are you proposing exactly?" they asked. The Raxian ambassador looked around the chamber, making eye contact with each delegate in turn before speaking words that would change everything. "I propose a joint military action against the human homeworld and all established colonies. A simultaneous strike that will cripple their ability to wage war or continue their expansion. We will give them a choice: submit to galactic oversight and accept permanent restrictions on their technology and territory, or face complete isolation behind a quarantine zone enforced by our combined fleets." Dr. Vron knew they had to respond, had to play their role perfectly or risk exposure. They stood slowly, their water suit making soft gurgling sounds as they moved. "I support this action," they said, hating every word that came out of their mouth. "Humanity represents an existential threat to all peaceful species in the galaxy. As a scientist, I can see no other logical course of action that ensures our collective survival." One by one, the other delegates voiced their agreement. The vote was called, and the result was unanimous. All 12 species would contribute ships and resources to a fleet that would assemble in 3 cycles and then jump to human space to deliver their ultimatum backed by overwhelming force. The Council adjourned with plans to meet again in 2 cycles to finalize the specific targets and military strategies. Dr. Vron returned to their quarters with movements that appeared calm and measured, but inside, Commander Sarah Chun was screaming.